silent. I don't think we've got any members online. We do have a member of the public, so just remember to leave your camera off until it's your time to speak. And reminder for members as well to turn your microphones and cameras on during the meeting. Cool. Is this better? Cool. Awesome. If your mobile phones are on, could you please make sure they're switched to silent? And the people online would have heard us fine. Cool. Could we start the live stream, please? And we'll just bring up the opening formalities. Please follow along with me. Tēnei o te haukai nei o takutapawai. Ko te haukai nuku, ko te haukai rangi, ko te haukai a tau tupuna a tānei nuia rangi. Ka piki te ai ki ngā rangi tūhaha, ki te tiho o mā no. Ka rokohina atu rā, ko io mātua kori anake. Ka tikinga mai ngā kiti o te wānanga. Ko te kiti tuauri, ko te kiti tuatia, ko te kiti aranui. Ka tiri a ka popoa, ka putu mai e ho, ko te ira tangata, ko te whiaio, ki te ao marama, tihei mauri ora. I'd like to move on to apologies. We've got some members joining us today that aren't on the committee but have shown some interest in being here. Welcome, Councillor Parkins. You're obviously more than welcome to take part in the meeting, but obviously won't be able to vote. But it is worth reminding everyone in the room that this committee has the delegation to make recommendations to the council before the full plan is notified. It will be the full council signing it off. I think we've also got Councillor Brown joining us when she can. Any other apologies for early departure?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Those may know that there is a funeral service for David Butler next door, so I just may need to go to that, but I was wanting to be here for public comment in particular.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor. We'll make those noted. We'd now like to move on to public comment. We've got 6 speakers today, all speaking on the Manor Park paper that is before us. So I'd like to welcome to the table Shirlene Eckstein.
Thank you. Whilst we as a community at Manor Park understand and appreciate the importance of waste management, this should not come at the cost of the mental health and well-being of homeowners, residents and recreational users in the community. Nor should it impose additional traffic safety risks on an already dangerous intersection that the residents of Manor Park and Haywards navigate several times per day. The earthworks consent that the Hutt City Council has approved for the Benmore Crescent site without any consultation with neighbouring residents, based on your professionals' assessment that this impacts were less than minor, is troubling. The large number and severity of complaints indicate that this assessment was incorrect. It is understandable why we as a community have little faith in the Hutt City Council's ability to understand and listen to our concerns regarding the rezoning of Benmore Crescent and its significant and severe impact on everybody who lives in and visits Manor Park. I sincerely hope that all members of the District Plan Review Committee have taken the time to read every single response and piece of feedback and written submissions relating to the opposition of this rezoning. For many reasons, not all of which have been captured in the report provided by your Senior Policy Planner, Stephen Davis, let me recap some of the quotes from residents in their feedback. One resident: I run a small one-on-one personal training studio from home, which requires windows to be open and fresh air. This is very close to the development. Your proposal with noise, smells, toxins will adversely affect my business and the value of my property. This development of an industrial zone will destroy a subdivision that has sat here for over 100 years, and we have residents that have lived here longer than our current mayor, and many on your room have been alive. The mental health and well-being of local residents should be your top priority. This is a residential area with a hospital, a retirement village, and care homes. People come here to play golf, get fresh air, enjoy the cycleways and river trails. This industrial area is hazardous to people's health, noise, air, pollution, odours, chemicals which will affect our health. You are taking away the peace and tranquility that we have always enjoyed in our own homes and backyards, and this is already impacting the mental health and well-being of local residents. The introduction of any residential development does not conform to the vision set by the Hutt City Council, where everyone thrives, and we need to protect our natural environment and grow our cities in ways that is sustainable and meets the needs of all of us who call Lower Hutt home. At a bare minimum, we request that the members of this District Plan Committee consult with the community. The Hutt City Council has a duty of care regarding the mental health, well-being and social impact on those residing in the Hutt Valley, and in particular Manor Park. This duty of care is emphasised in the district plan. However, the report lacks any indication of how you intend to manage and support our community and ratepayers. This consultation and support should occur before you even consider accepting the proposal from a senior policy planner unfamiliar with Manor Park, our community, our environment, and the current impact this is already having on us. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks so much for keeping it within 3 minutes. Do any members have any questions? Just wait at the table in case there are any questions. Any members?
Oh, sorry.
Cool. No, that's right, there's no questions. Sorry for playing musical chairs. Thank you. I'd like to welcome to the table now V. Savorath. You have 3 minutes and the timer will sound at the end. If you can leave a few seconds at the end, we can ask you some questions.
Right, okay.
Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora, Sabaidi. Good afternoon. I live in Manor Park with my wife. I personally have lived in Manor Park for 22 plus years. My wife, Alison, has grown up in Manor Park. She has been there for 40 plus years. We've raised 2 beautiful children, and it is a very, very special place that we call home. So with that in mind, the site at Benmore Crest that you are proposing to rezone had always been a green space that was abundant with plants, trees, native birds, and lizards. It has a beautiful stream that winds throughout the site and feeds into the Hutt River, the Taira Gorge aquifer, and our drinking water, which is also abundant with native fish and eels. So just out of interest, can I get a raise of hands with the councillors in this room if you are aware that the Benmore stream is actually listed by the Greater Wellington Regional Council as a water body of significance? So what that literally just means is that it has a lot of native fish and wildlife. So it should be protected. So, well, this once beautiful lush green space, abundant with wildlife, has already been completely destroyed by the developer in preparation for an industrial park. And it is now a bare wasteland that has been filled with crushed concrete and twisted metal. It is evident that the developer and waste management have absolutely no concern for Manor Park community or the environment or the impacts that an industrial zone will have on us. This is evident by the request that the proposed industrial zone should also include the railway corridor. This is so that they are able to avoid some of the industrial zone provisions that would protect the neighbouring neighbourhood area. Plus, would you believe it, on top of this, the developers are requesting the reduction/removal of some of the general industrial zone protections for privacy on neighbouring residential properties, this increasing the threshold of vehicle trips that would trigger the high trip generation, allowing for even more truck and industrial vehicles coming in and out of Manor Park. The removal of mandatory public notifications they want gone. They're removing the reference of offensive noise, dust, odour from the description of heavy industrial activities, which result in developers being able to avoid some consent criteria for their heavier industrial activities to happen on the site. Plus, in addition to this, the developers and waste management have also made a submission to the Greater Wellington Regional Council's PC1 plan, stating that they would not be able to comply to the proposed requirements around stormwater discharge runoff into neighbouring streams, waterways, and specifically call out Benmore Crescent Manor Park site as being not able to comply with what the Greater Council was trying to implement to protect the environment. So that they oppose all the triggers, protect the environment, and we have requests that we be removed completely from the PC1, basically allowing them to have toxic contaminants and untreated water and runoffs entering the streams, the Hutt River, and our drinking water. So before you consider the site being suitable for rezoning as industrial park and paving a way for waste transfer station, please, we request that you do your own investigations individually as councillors, and before you accept the recommendation made by your senior policy planner who knows absolutely nothing about Manor Park, the community, our environment, and the impact that it is already having on us. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, V. Do any members have any questions? Cool. Councillor Edwards.
Thanks very much for taking the time to come and speak to us. I'm having a little bit of trouble reconciling your description of that land with something that's in paragraph 14 of our papers, which, although it makes it clear to us that use has been pretty intermittent on this site, past uses have included as a nursery, outdoor industrial and construction storage, some industrial activities such as prefab building, construction, concrete batching, paint storage, recreation activities including paintball.
Yeah. I mean, those were, I guess, industry, well, light commercial areas, but the whole area was still filled with native birds and all the, native fish in the area and stuff. And if you actually been on site now and take a look at what was, even 4 years ago or whatever, it is basically bare. It is basically an empty site that is filled with nothing. Birds, native birds that used to go there are all gone. From my house, you used to be able to hear, owls and tuis and birds calls. It is absolutely dead right now. And the Benmore stream in itself is absolutely disgusting what, the developers have done. Recently, I've been there and where the stream has been completely dry and it has been raining several days before. And I actually went and checked it out. And you can tell the stream, which once was running freely into the Hutt, has been basically dried up, and there are just pools of, water in its place. And you can literally see native eels and fish struggling to get out into the Hutt River. So, I mean, you can't tell me that's normal. And I've been in the area for 22 plus years, and my wife is absolutely shocked. Her mum, who's been there, and the other part of Manor Park has been there for several years as well. So we are all shocked what's been happening over there.
Kia ora, just a quick question from me before we go to Councillor Parkins.
Yeah.
Are those changes you've just discussed that you've observed, are they in the time frame of when the earthwork consents are happening or longer period?
No, absolutely. It was happened when, the earthworks have been going on for 18 plus months. It's affected everybody. And since I've been at Manor Park for 20 plus years, I've never seen that stream that dry.
But sorry, my question is, have those changes you've observed only occurred in those last 18 months, or are they back to when Hayward's?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes,
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Parkins?
Kia ora. So my question is, have you reported those issues to Greater Wellington Regional Council? Because Greater Wellington are the ones who control that environmental protection. If you have, can you please CC me in on the report? I'd like to follow that up, and I suspect Councillor Quinton Duthie will be also keen to follow it up.
The answer is absolutely yes. We have reported that. I have actually gone and taken videos and put in maps and locations of where I feel that something needs to be done to help the native fish that has been there for probably a lot longer than what we have been. So, yes.
Kia ora, V. Any other questions from any members? No, thank you so much for taking the time to come in and join us.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome to the table Shane Horton, who is speaking for 3 minutes. Thank you, Shane.
Good afternoon, everybody. The residents of Manor Park and the Haywoods understand the aspiration of the land to be developed in Benmore Crescent, to be better utilised and to be financially profitable. And we acknowledge that the current rural zoning may not be entirely appropriate. However, we do not accept that the land should be rezoned as general industrial. This zoning nor the proposed waste transfer station to go in the site is appropriate, and it does not fit with the special character of Manor Park, the long-standing residents of our community and its surrounding environment. There are several other large pockets of land that already exist and are already zoned industrial that are far more suitable to house an industrial park and a waste transfer station. They are located in significant distance away from long-standing residential communities. and have easier access to state highway networks such as Judgeford, Nauronga. In addition to this, there is also a significant amount of industrial land in Wainuiomata that is currently vacant. There is also a significant amount of land that the existing Silverstream landfill, only 5 minutes away from Manor Park, that can perfectly accommodate a waste transfer station with the right engineering. Why would council allow this sort of activity in a residential area just meters away from our homes? The Manor Park and Haywoods community want to work with the Hutt City Council, and we do, on the proposal zoning of Benmore Cres, and we're committed to working with you to come up with a zoning and development options that will complement Manor Park and its surrounding environment, whilst also allowing for the landowner and the developer to still make a profit. And the community will engage with us. However, a community has engaged specialist planners and lawyers and is prepared to fight the project for its special character and its current residential rural status for the community and the environment. However, we would like to work with council on this. We strongly believe it is more appropriate zoning available, and preferred option would be a mixed use zone, which allows for mixed residential and light commercial, recreational, professional services, hospitality, offices and retail, all of which would be which complement us. It is important for you to note the community has done our research, and if you the councillors want to make a change, making a decision to proceed with industrial zoning would be great. I would like the councillors to think about this. Would you want a transfer station 30 metres from your homes, or your mother's, or your family? And we ask that you consider all of these things before making a decision today. Mixed is what we would like, and we want to talk to council about how we can achieve that.
Kia ora, thank you, Shane. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Shane, for your presentation and for everybody coming in. You mentioned several times that Manor Park has a special character. Can you describe to me what that means?
Oh, look, we have a mix of, like to give you an idea, we have hospitals here, we have special needs facilities, we have businesses, we have, our older generation of people here who have lived here for a long time and retired. We have our Hutt River, obviously with our nature. There's so much, we've got so much going for it, and a lot of the people that live here have been here for a long time. And it's a peaceful, humble place that we live in. And the reason why people have come to Manor Park is to get away from this, get away from the main city and be a little bit away from everything else. And to have this kind of intrusive thing happen in our backyard is actually quite offending. Just because, you're talking about a massive facility here. This is a really big facility, and we're talking about houses that are 30 metres away. I come out the back of my house and I can see it right behind my house, for example, and along with everybody down Mary Hughes. The traffic that's going to be coming through there. There's so many things. There's so many detrimental things that will happen as a result of putting this potential transfer station here. I know we're talking about the zoning, but zoning and industrial will make it so much easier for that to go ahead. And we don't want to give the green light for that. We would want the council to sit down and talk about it with us. What can we do? There's other options out there.
Thank you. A question from me. You mentioned that mixed use would be your preferred zone. In our report today, under disadvantages, it does say that having a mixed use zone would substantially increase the level of local transport to the area.
Yeah, not 500 trucks. I guess that's the difference. We're talking about having potentially up to 500 trucks coming into Manor Park, and we're just not set up for that. That roundabout's not set up for it. I know the developer wants to try and make exceptions to that and all that sort of thing, but it's just the amount of traffic that would come in as a result of that. Smaller businesses, green areas, things we've had there before, potentially. There's an option for residential because they've built it up 6 metres off from where it was, so the flood risk is low now. So it would have to be just moved back slightly from the earthquake fault line. But there's still plenty of room that could be used for residential, for example. We need homes in our area. Is that not a possibility? Maybe a mixture of both. Maybe some light commercial. Something. We can work with the council on how we do that. And happy to do that.
Kia ora. We'll get our officers to answer the questions. Some of the ones you raised there more about why it couldn't be residential. Do any other members have any questions? Mayor Barry.
Thank you for coming today and presenting. I think you put some really relevant issues on the table for us to consider. I suppose looking at the obligations we have, I suppose, as part of the region and providing industrial land, not just now but over the next 10, 20, 30 years, there is a limited supply of that land, and we know that vacancy rates of current land is pretty low. You referenced other locations where a transfer station or other things could go. Do you have any specifics of where you think it would be better placed?
Absolutely. I know that there has been some consultation or some talks around the Silverstream tip where they've got actually they have got a bit of room there, and I believe that that's engineered right. That's an option. I believe that the council may have even looked into that as an option. I know there is a lot of land over in Wainuiomata that's unused. I know this kind of goes into the Porirua district, but there is a whole lot of land right there. Could we not talk to the Porirua Council about that? I'm just throwing it out there. There's other locations that we could use that are just as close as Spanner Park. Why do we need to bring it into a residential? This is a residential. This is the first time ever anybody's ever considered doing this. Because ultimately, that's what's going to happen here. If we go industrial here, they will get potentially the go ahead to do this. It's far more likely, and we as residents feel that that's just so intrusive to our way of living.
Kia ora, thank you. No further questions. Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just a question. When you talk about unused land in Wainuiomata, you're talking about the rural land of Wainuiomata, is that what you mean?
I'm no specialist on that. I just know there's a lot of land there, and it would be away potentially from residents, I guess.
Thank you.
We're I guess on that. We're not against putting some light commercial in there. If it's industrial, when you're talking industrial, industrial is big time factories and all that sort of stuff. I think we just want to keep the character of Manor Park. That's the key. And yes, we're open, like I've said a number of times, we're open to how we do that. We just don't want a transfer station in our backyard or something of that at that level.
Well, it's not approved.
Yeah.
And one final question from me. You mentioned 500 trucks. Was that from the resource consent?
That's right. Yes.
We're going to be talking to that.
They're going to be talking to that. Yeah.
Perfect segue. I love it. No further questions. Awesome. Kia ora, thank you so much
for
coming in
thanks for your
today.
time today, people.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Ben Farrell to the meeting virtually.
John?
I'm going off this list, but we can do John if you want to, if there's... Yep, cool. John Harrison. Thank you. Pardon? And John, you've requested 4 minutes, so that's fine. So the buzzer will go at 4 minutes. If you could leave some time for questions, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak. My wife tells me that I don't speak very loudly, but I insist on speaking loudly on this one. I'm not happy. My wife and I have lived in Manor Park for 8 years. I can go over the same stuff that everybody else has, but the point I want to make is about some of the assumptions that have been made, and wrongly in my opinion, about traffic and just traffic, so I'll stick to that. There are concerns we've got at the moment about the viability of the roundabout, just with the lanes and things. It's bizarre trying to get out of Manor Park at the moment, let alone what I'm about to portray. Based on the latest plans supplied by Waka Kotahi, an estimate made, if it was developed into a general industrial zone, an extra 2,500 vehicles per day turning in and out of Benmore Crescent alone. So in addition to the 1,500 vehicles currently coming in and out, this proposed increase in traffic does not take into consideration the major increase in traffic arising from the Hebden Crescent closure for vehicles going south. So they have to come out, go round the roundabout and head off south again. So goodness knows how many trucks there are. But that's not taken into account these figures. So it's lunacy, in my opinion. Just one particular projection. Afternoon peak hour flows, and this is information supplied by Waka Kotahi and Roscoe's in their application, resource consent application. Projected peak hour flows between 4:45 and 5:45 p.m. on a weekday, which State Highway 2 and that is pretty congested, you'd have to say. The extra traffic from the development, a total of 4,800 metres of extra traffic in that 1 hour. Now, the resource consent number 2, which is for the development of it, says that that's in peak hour. It will be coming out and it will be going either State Highway 58, State Highway 2 going south, or State Highway 2 going north. Now, if we look at the north and just divide it, and I've done it arbitrarily, into 3 sections, there's 1.6 kilometres of cars or vehicles coming out of Benmore Crescent. This is addition to us, and trying to go north on State Highway 2. Now, if you've driven on State Highway 2 at 4:45 trying to go to Silverstream, you can't. It's chocker. It's back south of the interchange. You've got 1.6 kilometres of cars and trucks trying to get onto State Highway 2. What will happen is, because it's not moving, it will back up round the roundabout and back down into Manor Park. State Highway 2, State Highway 58 is now blocked. And that will happen 2 or 3 times a week from my figures. It's lunacy. And the official projections, if I can find it here, is something, the delay according to the, I'm sorry, I've lost it, but is in the region of 3 seconds to 11.2 seconds per vehicle. And that's fine, I believe that, as long as it's clear. If it's not clear, and it won't be during that time, it'll be chaos. You can't get in and out of Manor Park, let alone State Highway 58, State Highway 2 going north and south. So I think these assumptions, and this is just one, and I believe there's a lot more, the assumptions made by Waka Kotahi and Roscoe's need much further in-depth scrutiny from a practical point of view and scepticism. And that's what we need, scepticism, because looking at this and looking at from our perspective as a community, it's wrong. It's wrong. And it's going to be a hell of a mess if this goes ahead and happens. It's nuts. What I would say, we need help. We need lots of help. This is really a struggle, as you'd understand, because we've all got our opinions on this. We've all got our way of thinking, but we need help. And I thought, who are the best people to help us on this? Maybe our elected representatives, perhaps? How about it? Look at it from our perspective. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, John. Councillor Shaw.
I'm sure there'll be questions.
Thank you, John, for your presentation. A question I have is I share concerns about the viability of the roundabout. I'm looking at a picture of it here now, and the likelihood of, if the proposal goes ahead with increased traffic around there and also going through, if this proposal goes ahead, what do you think could be a viable solution for that problem area? Do you have any thoughts on that?
To be honest, if those projections are right, there isn't really a solution. Perhaps I'm understanding it wrong, and I've made my own figures on how long a truck is and how average, a car and trailer and all that sort of thing. It won't be far away, I don't think, but just that many vehicles at that hour, it won't work. It will not work. So, if I owned the land, I'd like to make some money out of it. There's no question about that. So I don't think it can stay as it is, obviously. It will be developed. There's no question about that. I do think that a more commercial, I don't know, market gardens, storage, anything like that perhaps won't have the same volumes of traffic at a certain time and those trucks are big. And you know, the official reports say, oh, it's a turning circle of, 15 metres for a 20-metre long B train. Well, yeah, you come out of Manor Park and they don't stay in the left lane turning to go south down State Highway 2. They take the whole thing. So nobody in the right-hand lane coming out of Manor Park can go anywhere until this jolly truck has gone round. They don't. And you can understand that they're huge trucks. So my answer would be, don't do general industrial. Go to commercial, retail, mixed use, something like that. And there must be a way. And I think Mr. Burrell has said he's got 15 or 20 different people queuing up to use it. Not all of them, I would assume, would be industrial. So.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thanks, Mr. Harrison. Just to be clear, those figures that you've read are from Roscoe or from NZTA, and are they for just if the waste management builds the facility it wants to, or is it for all three of those, whatever sorts of lots they are that Mr. Burrell wants to put there?
It's for all three of them. Strangely enough, and I had a meeting with the GM, or we did, with the GM of Waste Management recently, and he said, when I quoted the figures to him, I did it for the Roscoe's one and not the waste management resource consent. And he said that's got nothing to do with us. So I had a look at it, and their traffic figures are only a small proportion of what that resource consent number 2 for the whole area is. So goodness knows what the rest of it's going to be. But from my perspective, unfortunately, waste management isn't a huge part of that. It's just the general development. And I think that the figures were, I believe, were definitely from Roscoe's, but also I think they've been confirmed by Waka Kotahi as well.
Thank you. And just, I had a question on that as well. You mentioned the numbers are from there, but you also mentioned that you've done some calculations on truck lengths and stuff. So that 4-kilometre figure, is that in the report, or is that a figure you've calculated?
Oh, no, that's what I've calculated. I mean, I can make it available. It's pretty ad hoc.
Yeah, and then the figure you quoted on 2,500 cars extra a day, is that directly from the report, or is that?
2,900, yeah, that is an accepted figure from the resource consent, and I believe from, certainly from Roscoe's.
And then one final question from me before I see if there's any other final questions. You mentioned the Hebden Crescent closure. How do you think that would impact the Manor Park?
I actually don't know what the traffic statistics are, but certainly anecdotally, I've seen quite a few trucks coming up because obviously they can't come out of Hebden Crescent. If they want to go south, they can't come out and go south. They have to come up and literally go around the roundabout. The bulk of those, from what I've observed, are trucks, not B trains or anything, just what you'd call, I suppose, industrial trucks, 12 metres long. But there certainly have been a few.
So they're just using the roundabout, they're not coming into Manor Park?
No.
Just the roundabout?
No.
Cool.
But again, it's more traffic that uses the roundabout, and that's a lot of our concern.
Kia ora, thank you. Any final questions from any other members? No, thank you so much for coming in, John.
Thank you.
I believe we're now going to Anne. Yep, kia ora. Thank you, Anne. You've got 3 minutes. The buzzer will buzz at 3 minutes. If you can leave some time for questions, that'd be awesome. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora tātou, ko Anne Alkema toka wingawa. I'm here as the Manor Park Golf Club's representative, and the outcome that the Golf Club is seeking today is a deferment of the decision to rezone 30 Benmore Crescent until current council work is completed. Included in this work is the future development strategy, part of which is a regional industrial land study. At the same time, the council is working on the spatial plan, which includes a theme on business and industry activity, like you already knew that. It seems odd to us that a specific site is being considered for rezoning while wider work on industry needs is underway. The council appears to want to preempt the findings of this wider work and rezone 30 Benmore Crescent to general industrial without garnering the wider evidence base on which to make decisions. This is what might be termed convenience-based rather than evidence-based decision-making. We say convenience-based as the rezoning could be seen to be driven by consents that have been lodged for land use that includes a waste transfer station. A consent for earthworks deemed non-notifiable was granted by the Council in December 2022, prior to the district plan review in 2023. These earthworks are expansive and not within the rules of the current district plan. 2 further consents have been lodged and the Council is awaiting further information before approving these. If the rezoning to general industrial goes ahead, it will pave the way for these to be approved and thus a waste transfer station will rise up in Manor Park community's backyard. The golf club is part of this community and operates as kaitiaki of a green space that we are improving environmentally through, amongst other things, pest eradication and the planting of native trees. During this work, we are seeing an increase in bird numbers and native fish species. We will continue this work and are unsure what impact a general industrial zone will have on the wider natural environment. While the proposal to rezone is within the remit of the Council, it is the process that sits uncomfortably with the golf club. The limited consultation with the community over the consent for land use shows an overall lack of transparency and care for the community. It also shows behaviours not in keeping with the Council's shared values of whanaungatanga, manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, whakapono and kotahitanga. In conclusion, Manor Park Golf Club sees the proposed zoning change as premature, given the regional future development strategy is not yet finalised and work on the spatial plan is still underway. Therefore, we would like to see the decision deferred until there is a wider evidence base on which to make such a decision. Finally, we thought the days of allowing general industrial sites adjacent to Te Awa Kairangi were long gone. At best, the rezoning proposal is a short-term, convenient fix. But long-term, what will future generations think of such a rezoning decision? Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, thank you so much, Anne, for your submission. Just hang there. I think we've got some questions. Councillor Parkins.
Kia ora, and thank you for your submission and thank you for all the work that you do for Manor Park and also nature. Just wondering whether or not you're aware that our advice from officers, point 22 in the report, that due to the consents that you've already talked about already being in process, they sit under the current district plan as they
Yes.
are. Even if we were to make changes and make this mixed use, like commercial, whatever it happens to be, that wouldn't change the status of where those resource consents go. So if those resource consents go through, they still go through.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm not happy about it, agreed. Yeah.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just a follow-up question, and it's really to do with the framing, because it's been mentioned, I think, 2 or 3 times now that this zoning change would pave the way for the waste management.
It's still a
the waste
discretionary
transfer
activity
plan.
within the general industrial use.
Whereas it's clear in our papers that the waste management plan is an existing application and it's been dealt with under the current operative district plan. So I just kind of can't see how this plan change, you feel, would pave the way for something that's already a live thing and being dealt with. Without the plan change, it can go ahead.
Can we
either
leave
way.
that for the next speaker?
Okay.
You guys have perfectly set up the segues. I love it.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Was there any other further questions? No. Kia ora. Thank you so much for your time. And we'd now like to move to the next speaker, Ben Farley, who's the environmental planner representing the community group. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Chair. Farrell, and look, sorry.
Farrell, yep, sorry.
All good. Sorry I couldn't be with you today. I will give a brief intro. I'm sorry, I don't recognise you guys, so that shows you how long it's been since I've been working for the council. By way of a brief intro, I'm a Hutt boy. I'm currently residing in Queenstown, but often pop back up to spend time with friends and family and our hut and their rongorongas. I'm an independent planning expert and qualified commissioner. I cut my cloth as a planner and policy advisor 20 years ago, working for Upper Hutt and Lower Hutt city councils, and was a consultant at Boffimiscal and Wellington and provided numerous advice to this council during that time. I'm the current president of the New Zealand Resource Management Law Association, and I just finished a term on the board of the New Zealand Planning Institute, that's NZPI. So turning to this case and the site at 30 Benmore, obviously there's a lot going on, and you've heard from the residents that they're under a lot of stress. I observe the residents have been forced to be involved in quite a few statutory processes all at the same time, and they're on the back foot for all of these. And just to list these again, formal statutory processes, there's the Regional Council and the Hutt City Council resource consents that approve the earthworks undertaken on the site, all non-notified. There's the live resource consent applications before Hutt City for a business park and a waste transfer station, with the applicant pushing for non-notification for all of these. There's also, we're aware of more regional council consents to come. There is a current application by the leasee to Whakatahi to change the access arrangements from the state highway to the site to enable the business park. And this has all been undertaken without the residents being allowed to participate in that process. As rating authority, I'm assuming some of you will be aware of those conversations. We have specifically, or the residents at least, have been told they cannot participate in that designation process. And then there's proposed plan change 1 to the natural resources plan, which among other things identifies 30 Benmore Crest as a site that is not planned urban land. I repeat, it is not planned urban land. And the landowner and the leasee are opposing that provision in the regional plan. So that's a lot for anybody to grasp. And I agree with the residents that it appears that this council, through its actions, that you do have a predetermined position that's already made by you or your officers to support the landowner, to support the leasee, and to support Waste Management New Zealand. And this is reinforced by the reluctance of Hutt City to engage with the residents. I specifically asked for that, and we got a meeting and a survey, but it's not proper engagement. It's also reinforced by the officer's recommendations to proceed with the plan change in spite of the local community opposition some of it's been summarised to you today. It is also reinforced by some rhetoric in the officer's report, and this goes to the question just asked. For example, the suggestion at paragraph 22 that notification of the proposed plan change will not be influential on the current resource consent applications. Now that statement is at best naive and at worst disingenuous, because notification of this plan change will shift the goalposts. It signals that Hutt City's preferred zoning for the site will be industrial, whether the provisions have legal effect or not. In this case, the issues being raised in the officer's report cannot be fixed through the rezoning process, because the rezoning process fundamentally puts up one preferred zoning outcome and really only enables a comparison between that outcome and the status quo. It does not really provide for alternative and potentially more appropriate outcomes, such as mixed use, to be given fair consideration. In short, you've got to get the zoning fairly right at the point of notification. So I put it to you that in this case, you should direct staff, and I agree with Anne here, hold off preparing the plan change until at least the future development strategy and spatial plan have been advanced. I trust you can appreciate how boxing on with this plan change ahead of the FDS and spatial plan would be ad hoc and representative of poor strategic planning approach. Critically, I think you should direct staff to gather more accurate information and properly engage with all parties on a non-statutory basis to see if we can narrow the differences and ideally come up with a structured planned approach for this site. Getting to the end, look, I often hear councillors complain that around the country that they are not able to be effective in RMA decision-making processes. I also observe councillors deflecting their obligations to protect their communities by hiding behind officer recommendations, because that's just the easiest thing to do. I think in this case, you should show some compassion and true community leadership by taking more ownership of this decision-making process to ensure, among other things, that the residents are properly engaged and Hutt City works towards a collaborative outcome so as to minimise costs, risks and frustrations to all parties. And in that regard, my concluding statement is that the residents here are entirely in your hands to determine if Hutt City Council is going to do its job by leading a collaborative and more informed decision-making process, or whether council simply cops out and proceeds to notification of this ad hoc plan change that appears fundamentally flawed and as such carries significant litigation risks and costs to all parties involved. And that's let alone the likelihood of it to result in poor urban development outcomes as it stands. So thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for your presentation, Ben. You might not have heard it, but the residents clapped, but the microphone wasn't on. We'd go Mayor Barry first and then Councillor Parkins.
Thanks, Ben. You started off by outlining your vast experience and expertise, which is great for us to be able to hear. But then you did somewhat attack the integrity of our officials around predetermination and what's in these reports. Can you point to me, while I understand around spatial plans and the FDS, can you point to me, this is me being devil's advocate, anything that suggests that this proposal or recommended options around light industrial or general industrial is completely out of sync with what is proposed in those plans, or how far we've advanced through those plans? So like when we look at it from a regional point of view, like is there things you can say to me which say we have totally got this wrong and even considering these as options?
Well, let's take mixed use, for example, and I understand the council officers have just said it's not appropriate. You heard earlier around this, I think V raised the issue of the flood risk and the 6 metre height. Where has there been a recalibration of the flood risk and the appropriateness of actually thinking about mixed use? That seems to have been discounted and not looked at properly. This is potentially an ideal location for mixed use and residential if you take the proximity to the train station. And now, as you'll know, it's all about locating higher densities near public transport nodes. Those are a couple of examples. Look, in terms of my criticism of the predetermination, that comes a lot out of the seeing where the residents' feelings have come from and their inability, despite numerous requests for the last 18 months, to get support from Hutt City and from other councils and from Wakakatahi in terms of engagement.
Councillor Parkins.
Kia ora, Ben. Thank you for your information and presentation. Quick question on the mixed use and then something on engagement. From the mixed use perspective, you talk about residential. Over half, to a third to a half of that area is earthquake risk and within that boundaries. Do you think that that's an appropriate use of that site given the earthquake risk which cannot be mitigated against? And then my question on the engagement is, what engagement would you like to see in the future happen for residents?
Cool. Firstly, that earthquake risk, I think you should test that, really test that fact. Or this is half the point. That needs to be tested through evidence as what is the actual risk. Some of the people standing, I think, in the room are also affected by that earthquake fault line, which goes through, as you guys know, it goes through the centre of the town. I'm not sure if it is or if it isn't half the site affected by that fault line or the provisions. What I do know, and you've heard it from someone before, there is still plenty of land that could be developed outside the active fault. My main point there being more work's required to actually test that. In terms of engagement, non-statutory engagement, this should be, whether or not we go through the formal notification process and court, which is where we'll end up if this just boxes on now, we're going to have all the parties in the room. Let's skip ahead to the current environment court processes and appeals. We'll end up with the same experts, the same people, the same parties, spending lots of money in the room trying to resolve things. You can facilitate that discussion now whilst you are in charge and responsible collaboratively for that conversation with the council. The council, the residents should not have to pay for me, for lawyers, for other experts to battle against each other because that's the adversarial approach. So I would, again, non-statutory approach, let's get it spatially planned and the community have a good understanding of what's needed, and if there's a need to agree to disagree, then at least let that disagreement be understood based on facts and evidence.
Thank you, Ben. Were you engaged by the community to take part in the non-statutory consultation we've recently undertaken, or have you kind of only joined the process with them more recently?
What non-statutory, was it the survey?
So at the end of last year, we published a draft plan, a non-statutory draft plan, so that the community could engage with the plan before it went through the statutory process later this year, early next year. As you'll be aware, once it gets notified, it's a very formal process. So community meetings were held in Manor Park, letters were sent out. Were you part of that process, or?
Yeah, I was familiar with it. I requested that meeting, that engagement occurred. I emailed and rang up Tim Johnson and said, you need to speak to the community. This council needs to engage with the residents. I honestly think that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't picked up the phone, or if these residents hadn't have pushed for that meeting to occur.
And do you not think that meeting or the other non-statutory process that we've been through was sufficient, or you think we need to do that again?
Well, that feedback has demonstrated that overwhelmingly the local residents do not want this plan change. So if you agree to box on now, that's the Hutt City Council making its decision that pre-notification engagement effectively meant nothing. Again, reinforcing this perception that a predetermined outcome has already been reached, that you're in it to support the landowner, the leasee, and Waste Management New Zealand, because you're not listening to the local residents.
Councillor Mitchell.
Kia ora, Ben. I'm going to ask you this question because I was encouraged to by the last speaker, and I know you kind of covered it off in your opening statement, but I'll just ask the question again for clarity, which was to do with a statement that's been made a few times that this potential rezoning would pave the way for the waste transfer station. The waste transfer station is a live application under the current operative district plan. It won't be considered under the new plan. So I'm just curious, in your experience as a planner in this field over a long period of time, what kind of influence would a potential future rezoning have on a live and current consent application?
Firstly, I think it's just plain wrong that the proposed plan change won't be considered as part of the resource consent application. The resource consent application is required, and the officers will agree with this, that under Section 104, they have to consider proposed plans. So the moment you notify this plan, the resource consent decision-making process requires consideration of the proposed provisions. The issue, I'm sure, as your council's lawyer or the officers will say, will come down to weighting, and they will argue or suggest to you, probably based on what's in the report now, that little weight will be given. That's a discretionary decision process, and it will depend on the arguments at the time before the commissioner or the judge. But the fact is, and I would absolutely, and I'd like the council officers to reconsider their position on this, or at least clarify why they say there's no influence. The decision maker, just to repeat, the decision maker for resource consent will be required to consider it in the decision-making process. It'll be an issue of what weighting is given. And just to reinforce, if this council, if you decide to proceed now, then you are clearly indicating a preferred rezoning for the future of this land to be industrial.
Thank you.
Any other questions from any members? Cool. Thank you so much for joining us, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cool. That's all the speakers I've got written down on my list, but I know some people did sneak into the room after we'd started. Were there any other members here wishing to speak under public comment? Yep, come and join us at the table, sir. Yep. Yeah. Yep.
by the
Sorry, can we grab your name before we get started?
Tony Borra,
Tony
a
Bryant.
resident of Manor Park for about 23 years. My brother sat in here as a councillor many, many years ago, so I'm honouring him as well. But as an old person and being pressured, I'm out of the environment now of working for about 15 years, so I don't feel that happy. Let me just go back briefly that a woman here whose husband and I made a representation when the interchange was put, was facing traffic problems, and I was told, why the hell would you live in Manor Park? Hell of a area to get in and out of. Then we built the roundabout, great. And now we're looking at this trouble with vehicles. And I'd like to reinforce all the things that have been said. The biggest fear, I have written to Waka Kotahi, who've brushed me aside. I've written to the police, who've brushed me aside. The hazards that we have, I'm 80, right? And I'm starting to fear driving through that area now. Looking at these vehicles, the truck and trailer units, which are massive. They're massive. I don't believe, I worked in the Ministry of Works design group that did, we put the motorway through years ago. And I can't believe we future-proofed designs to account for the future. No one future-proofed this design for our current roundabout that we're talking about 4,500 vehicles per day, storage of 100 vehicles on site per night, starting work in the morning at 4:30 in the morning. And I think people are coming, to pick up their vehicles around 4:30 to start work for the day. We are servicing, I believe, Porirua Council, Upper Hutt, Wellington, Lower Hutt, all of these communities in this one little environment. Has been a beautiful, peaceful area. We go bike riding along the riverbanks. Lots of people love it. That's being destroyed, guys, I can tell you. I feel sorry for these people behind me who work. Most of them can't be here because they work. Young people with families. We've got old people. We've got retirement homes. We've got healthcare facilities everywhere. Driving in, the reason I wrote to the police is that truck and trailer units are crossing the centre line. One of these people noticed me observe and pull up to an emergency procedure driving a vehicle recently, not quite related, but near our intersection. It has changed severely. The life that we have, our value of our houses, I think mine's probably dropped $100,000, but I'm not right beside the development. I'm 2 or 3 rows back. Last suggestion, if you did change and you wanted to put other than residential, a thing that would succeed in there, it's like we have at Melling, a storage facility. Now, that would cope for a lot of area, probably bring in good money for the council, and not regular use of vehicles. You don't see them coming into Melling at a stage that would be dangerous. But there we are. I'm a little bit emotional about it. I want to retire. My wife said, we'll be taken out of here when we die. We probably will now, because no one will pay us quite the money that we need to go to the retirement village. But that's all, guys. Thank you. Okay? No questions?
Thank you, Tony. Any questions?
No.
No,
My
kia
brother enjoyed his time on the council anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Kia ora. Were there any other members of the public wishing to speak?
Can I just quickly? It's Faye again.
Yeah.
I didn't get time to say it, but I just wanted to say that personally, I am shocked and horrified that not one single councillor in this Hutt city has actually put up their hand during the last 18 to 2 years, in support of the community. In fact, I actually read an article written by a councillor in the local Hutt News actually saying that Benmore Crescent will be rezoned industrial without any consultation. So I just wanted to add that.
Kia ora. Thank you for the extra submission. Any members wishing to speak?
Can I please add something personally?
if it's really quick, we are definitely bending the rules a bit here. But yep, thank
I'm
you.
in real estate. We've had quite a few properties come up in Manor Park over the last few months. And we obviously want to know how this is going to affect our house prices. So this is number 9 The Square, which is the other side, which is about a kilometre away. I lost 4 buyers out of, we had to do 5 offers, I had 1. So our property values, even though the ones in Mary Hughes will be affected more, it's affecting the whole. Who compensates us for that? I'm in the same situation with my hubby. We were looking at downsizing, and this is our biggest asset, and where to now from us? Who's going to buy there? I wouldn't buy there now. I'm right at the end of the Grove of Mary Hughes Grove, and there was our place to stay until we go to retirement, and we'll have to stay there. We won't be able to sell. I tried to sell 36 Mary Hughes Grove. People aren't bothered. So this is impacting us horrendously. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Were there any members of the public that haven't already spoken that wish to make a submission? No. Kia ora, thank you. I will close off public submissions there. Councillor Mitchell, did you have something you want to clarify?
I would just like to clarify, because I think there was a reference made to an op-ed I wrote in the Hutt News, which was actually written last year. And what it said was that we were going out to consult on a draft district plan, which proposed to rezone this part of Manor Park. That was 100% true. The intention of that op-ed, of course, was to engage our public, and clearly a lot of you got engaged in that process. The same article was mistakenly reprinted by the Hutt News a couple of months ago, but everything it referred to had happened in the past and talked about a process that I'm glad to see you're well aware of and had an opportunity to say, to have your say. It was not about predetermination, it was stating what was in the draft district plan, which you've all since seen. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. And I'd like to welcome to the table now Stephen Davis, our Senior Policy Planner. While he does that, I think it might be useful just for... Say again, sorry? He's welcome to watch the live stream of the meeting if you let him know it's on YouTube being streamed. Yeah, just thought it might be useful for officers just to clarify the process of the district plan and what we are actually deciding today in terms of the resource consent, the district plan, and what the process is from here before we get into specific on Manor Park, because obviously Manor Park is just one issue in the district plan, but we'll follow the same process as the district plan. So I'm not sure if that's a question for Tim or Stephen or Nathan.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'll cover that off, but I'll probably say the other things I had notes on first, just to get them done. I'll take what's in the report as read, but give you a few updates. One is that the summary of feedback includes description of the feedback from Waste Management and Roscoe. Just to clarify, that's not a joint submission from the two of them. They don't necessarily agree with each other. Those are just the points made collectively between them. There's been comment in the public comment about whether there was an option of a mixed use zone. My interpretation of that is that most closely matches what we've shown as option 3 in the report. There's obviously been a lot of comment about the resource consents in that process. I'll talk a bit in general about that, but for the most part, I'll get Tim to comment on the actual resource consents that have been applied for and where they're at. As the head of planning, he's got oversight of the resource consents team and the work they do there. We've read the material, the written material that's been sent in by stakeholders, and obviously listened to the public comment that we've had now. There's obviously been a lot covered, so I'll just wait and let you know what questions you want to ask about that rather than trying to preemptively cover it. The report promises that I'll give you a verbal update on the industrial land study, so we'd hoped to have that finalised by this meeting. The original due date for that report was the 1st of July. It's now been substantially delayed because it's been caught up with a second regional piece of work looking at aggregate mineral resources, which doesn't really relate to this site at all, but will affect other sites around the region about whether they're better suited for industrial land or quarries and so on. So the final report will be months away. However, I can tell you we've been briefed by those project leads about where that's at. This site on Benmore Crescent is the only site in this council's district that made the cut to be assessed, even counting for land that can be accessed when Petone to Granada and Cross Valley connections are built. We don't yet know exactly how it compares to every other site in the region, but it does quite well on all of the assessment criteria that are in there. You have the option of waiting for that final report or to make a decision now and then revisit it after that final report, but I think we'd have to say something extremely surprising to change much about the information we've presented to you here today. And in any case, regardless of exactly how this site ranks compared to other sites in the region, I think you can justify picking any one of those 4 options presented and still meeting the general requirement to provide business and industrial land and a reasonable use for the site that's set out in the legal considerations section of the report. So talking about the process of the district plan and the decision you're making here today, I guess I'll work backwards from what we've talked with you about, Mr. Chair, and the time frame we had was that we're looking to notify the new plan early next year, January or February. To do that, the council must make the decision about to notify that plan. Only the council can make that decision, and that will be at a meeting in December. Our understanding is they will rely on this committee's, hope to rely on this committee's advice. So you will have a meeting immediately before that in December where you'll have access to the full plan as proposed, all of the supporting reports and evidence behind it, and make that decision to go or not go. And then in advance of that, to help us prepare that and make sure that that goes as smoothly as possible and you don't have to tinker during that meeting, we're bringing the substantive decisions to you now to not make a final decision on whether that goes ahead, but to hopefully get it closer to where you want it. So this being one of those major decisions, other ones like, for example, around Nathan can probably give you examples if you want. I can't remember exactly where they are, but the one I talked to you about, the general approach for the mixed-use zone at the last meeting I spoke at, for example, it's one of those major decisions. So what you're doing here is giving direction to staff about the work we should do over the coming months to prepare the plan for you to make that decision on in December. I hope that covered what you wanted to know about the process for this committee, but I assume there'll be some questions.
Yeah, I had one question on something that Ben mentioned about, I think he said section 104 about any other matters. Obviously, it says in the report that if this plan change was to go through, it would have no impact on, sorry, I'll bring up the wording because I don't think it says no impact, but yeah, just wondering if you could talk to that theme a bit, that if this is notified now, it won't become operative till 2026, 27.
Yeah, so I guess there's a lot of things that could happen. You're kind of doing crystal ball gazing about what happens when. If the consents are wrapped up in the next 7 months or so before you notify the plan, then obviously the new plan will have literally zero effect. If they drag on longer than that, which again is not really within the council's control, you have a requirement when you're making the notification decision and the final decision of the plan to have regard to the proposed plan, if there is one at that point. What waiting on that is, Mr. Farrell, as Mr. Farrell said, that's up to the decision maker on that resource consent about how to weight it. But there's obviously been a lot of consents that this is applied to in the country over the decades, and in general, those decision makers put pretty low weight on a plan that's only just been proposed, especially if there's submissions that come in for and against that that zoning, and it hasn't been to a hearing yet, hasn't heard any extra evidence, and so on. So it would need to be a radical departure from the status quo for that to really have any impact on the consent. the recommended approach would go from being a discretionary activity for a transfer station to still being a discretionary activity for a transfer station. It's not a radical departure, even if the policies are worded a bit differently and the name of the zone is different.
Cool. I had one follow-up question on that before I open it up. On the discretionary activity, under the current district plan, it's a discretionary activity. Under what we're proposing, if it was to go ahead, would also be discretionary activity. Both would require resource consents. If it was being assessed under the operative, we're proposing some pretty strict site-specific provisions. Would they come into play if it was being assessed under the operative plan?
Again, it depends when. So if that decision is made in the next 7-ish months before you notify the plan, no, they won't have any attention paid to them. After that, it's up to that decision maker about how to weight them. But again, if there's still a live controversy over whether to even do that rezoning, they would be putting pretty minimal weight on the details of what's in there. It might help them put more weight on the issues that those provisions are designed to address, but the details of them I don't think would be a significant impact.
So from a planning pathway, it's no more difficult if it was to be done in the the consultation period of the district plan.
Again,
I'm asking you some pretty tricky questions.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of crystal ball gazing, but I mean, there's a lot of possible things that could happen. So it's worth, I think it's always worth thinking about the giant universe of things that could happen. If it's during that consultation phase, the decision maker on the resource consent is looking at the formal steps that have happened in that process. So they may pay attention to the proposed plan and the supporting reports around that plan. They may pay attention to the written submissions that have been made and the further submissions that have been made. And if you've got to the point of actually getting to the hearing, the evidence that's been lodged and so on. But in general, where there's still major issues in contention, that resource consent decision maker won't try to foresee where it's going to go until it's very clear where it's going to go.
Thank you. Obviously, we're not considering the resource consent at all today, but there have been a number of questions about it raised. Tim, I'm just wondering if you are able to give us an update with the resource consent. Has that assessment of the notification been done yet? Because it may have been some time since members of the public have had any update on the resource consent, noting we are not deciding on the resource consent at this meeting.
Yeah, no, sure. By way of update, there are 2 current resource consents for that site. I agree with Mr. Farrell. There is a lot going on in this area. Those 2 resource consents are currently both on hold at the request of the applicant, and the reason the applicant has put them on hold is because they're currently in discussions with Waka Kotahi to get their written approval. We understand those discussions are ongoing and actively ongoing, and we understand that there may be a decision soon from Waka Kotahi that would enable them to give their written approval. Now, again, I'm not directly involved in those conversations, but this is where we understand things are at. So at that point in time, when the developer can get Waka Kotahi's written approval, we would expect the developer to then take those applications off hold, and that's when we will progress to the next stage, which will be to make a notification decision on those applications.
Cool, thank you. Any resource consent questions? Yep, cool, Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, what kind of influence would Waka Kotahi's written approval or the lack of Waka Kotahi's written approval have on that consent application?
Yep, so that process is, again, separate to the resource consent. The resource consent doesn't need their approval, but the reason the applicant has put it on hold is effectively they can't go ahead with the work they need to do without having Waka Kotahi's approval. They're required to do works within a designated area that Waka Kotahi control. And so if they can't get that approval, I don't know what they will want to do with those resource consents, but effectively it will be up to them if they can't get that approval.
So it's approval for some kind of roadworks, essentially.
Correct. It's works within the designation area.
Thank you. Any other resource consent questions? Councillor Parkins.
Kia ora. This is 31A, and it mentions that options 1, 2 and 3 would also change this, include specific changes to the site address, lowering the high trip generator thresholds to assess transport impacts. Just for clarity, does that mean that it is more likely to trip the high trip threshold or less likely to trip it?
that'll mean it'll trip it with a smaller number of vehicle trips. So you won't need as many vehicle trips to need a consent. Or rather, you'll need consents for smaller volumes.
Mr. Tioni?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You look confused as to who I am. Just a quick question on first the non-notifiable consent around the earthworks and then the other two that are on hold. Has there been, or what was the engagement with Mana Whenua over the three, or has there been any, particularly with Port Nicholson Block?
Look, I can't remember in relation to the non-notified consent that was granted. But in terms of the two current consents, as I said, we're not actively doing any work on them. They are on hold. So certainly the next part of that process will be, if it comes off hold, to then decide on notification and engagement for it. So that there is still an ability to do that if we get a direction that they want to proceed with those applications.
Deputy Mayor Lewis and then Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a thought. If there's a process going with Waka Kotahi and we move on with this today, does that give any weighting to the work with Waka Kotahi and the developer? Do we know that? Like their process is on hold at the moment. So I'm just wondering if we move toward, actioning this.
No, again, I know there's an overlap for the benefits of the residents, but important to note they are two separate things going on. There are clearly linkages between them. I'm not saying there's not, but effectively either the resource consents will come off hold and go ahead, but we are still required to proceed through to our proposed district plan and decide what to do with that site. So I know it's difficult to detach them, but they are two separate things that will run their own processes.
So just to follow up on that, so once it gets to the resource consent stage, the issues that were raised around traffic and the volume and the length, congestion and everything, will that be processed through the resource consent?
So at the moment, the resource consent, the numbers that the gentleman referred to are from the resource consent application. So they are correctly related to the trip generation from the waste management, but also they are seeking to allow for additional trip movement for development across the site. So those consent applications are traffic to enable the development of the whole site. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about previous cases. I'm thinking Kmart and Petone, their trip generator, they had to install traffic lights was the option because a roundabout couldn't go. Would those sorts of things be imposed on this development?
Correct. So that's where there's a linkage. So at the moment, the purpose of the Waka Kotahi discussion is to design the traffic improvements for the interchange. So they are being designed for a certain number of movements so that can facilitate it. Under the proposed plan change, there is an additional requirement that would trigger a need for resource consent depending on the trip movements associated with the uses that could come forward on that site.
So just to comment, it's a long process and this is only the beginning by the sounds of it.
Well, correct. The proposed district plan process is certainly a long process. Just to refer, depending on what the committee recommends today, we'll go forward to the full council to decide. The committee's only making a recommendation of what can be included or what should be included in the proposed district plan. That decision will be for the council to make about what is included in the proposed district plan. Then whatever is included will go through a submission and appeal process, which is expected to take from notification to decision 2 years. So apologies, yes, it's a long process. I would perhaps one other comment in agreeing with Mr. Farrell as well, that he thinks any decision like this should be based on facts and evidence. What I would say is the very nature of a district plan process has to be based on facts and evidence. So that whatever is decided will need to be tested through the proposed district plan notification and a hearing process.
Councillor Parkin and then Mayor Barry.
Kia ora, just wondering what the impact and practicality of putting this on hold until we hear back from the resource consent is.
As I said, first thing I'll answer is they are different processes. The resource consent will run its course no matter what. To put this on hold, I'm a bit unclear about, because this is part of the full district plan review. So to put this on hold, I presume you're suggesting, should we be delaying the whole notification of the proposed district plan? And my quick answer to that is there are many parts of the proposed district plan. We are going to be discussing hazards at some point today. We are effectively delaying the whole proposed district plan. This isn't an isolated plan change. This is part of that much bigger proposed district plan. So if that is the decision, then we will be delaying all parts of the proposed plan.
Mayor Barry, then Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Mitchell.
Well, will we, Tim? I mean, is it an option? I'm just theorising here, and it's probably a stupid question, but you could, or could we, not make a decision on that piece of land, leave its current zoning, get this messy, there's this messy clash at the moment through no one's fault of a current resource consent processes and us working on the district plan, let the resource consents be sorted out under the operative plan, and then bring in a plan change afterwards. Is that a really expensive thing? Is that not unwise in planning terms? What's your comment on that option, if it is an option?
My first comment would be, I'm repeating myself now, apologies for this, the resource consent process will run its course, and I don't think that should be making a decision on what we do with the plan change. The second point about could we carve this out or take it out of the proposed district plan, I must admit we haven't thought about that. I presume it's an option. I would like to request that we give that some more thought so that we could give you the correct answer about what it means for the whole proposed plan and the legal side of it. But yeah, as I said, I don't think it is sensible to delay a plan change because of a resource consent which will run its course. But I think Stephen had a comment as well.
I was mostly going to say what Tim was going to say. You don't have to make the decision at this meeting. Like I say, there's a whole series of decisions we expect to bring to you over the course of this year before you make your final recommendation all in one go in December to the full council. So I think there's a question of deferring it then and seeing what happens, but you may defer it and then still have to make the same decision without any more information. Deferring it until after that and doing some other process, there's options around there which we could explore and report back to you, but you still need to choose something for it to be in the plan when you notify the plan. Having chosen whatever it is you choose, anyone can submit for or against and ask for anything else, and the council's then in a position of, during the hearing, supporting the position it's come up with, debating the different options, coming up with evidence for and against. So the owner of the site can submit saying, we want it to be industrial anyway, and residents can submit saying, we want it to be whatever other zone they want it to be, rural or mixed use or something else. And then you have that discussion in the hearing, regardless of what the council proposed. So you may not necessarily defer it by deferring it, if you know what I mean.
Mayor Barry, Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Brick.
I'll just stick on the resource consent conundrum we've got here. But Tim, are there other examples from your experience with this district plan or others you've been involved in where you do have this overlap and this challenge when you have active resource consent applications versus a district plan review? And did you want to cite them? Because I think it's important. This isn't unusual, I think, for us to be dealing with, and it's certainly not a conspiracy as well, which I can understand people caught in the middle of it may feel that. But do you want to give some other examples?
I'm trying to think of current examples, but you're exactly right, Mayor Barry. I mean, this is going to be common. This has been common through all the councils that are going through district plan reviews. There are live applications that are considered across different plan changes. That will have happened across the region as all of the councils are going through plan changes. So you're right, this is not an unusual circumstance. And just to, again, reiterate, I said there is no predetermination on our part. We are looking at all the options. And certainly this is not being done to facilitate a waste transfer station. This is based purely on the fact that we are at this point in time when we are reviewing all of the zonings across the city through the proposed district plan. I'm just trying to think of other specific examples, and I can't off the top of my head, but there would be many applications of very completely different scales which are considered across two different plans at the current time. In fact, our consenting team will have to deal with this for all applications as we go through the notified process.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell, did you still have a question?
Yeah, sorry, it's really hard to separate out questions about the consent and the zoning, so I have questions about both. And one of the things I think I heard in you say in there was that this wasn't being done to facilitate the waste transfer station. So actually a high level question I did have is what has prompted this suggested rezoning? Is it something that's come from the owner or the developer, or is it something that's come purely from this need for providing more industrial land in our city?
I mean, both. Our analysis of the zoning included looking at sites with unique issues, which this certainly was one of, so we proactively went out to consider what we should do for this site, but it's also based on feedback from the owner who did contact us to see about options for the site. But that's the case with all the work we've prepared for you. A lot of it has involved engagement with stakeholders. For example, the other work I did for you before about the open space zone, that was all based on for privately owned open space. We went out and consulted with the owners of all of that land about their aspirations for those sites, and that informed that zoning. Similar work for rural and commercial and residential zones, for example, has informed those decisions. That doesn't mean we're doing what people ask for, but we have done a lot of effort to go out and find out what people want.
Thank you. And you asked him for examples of kind of clashes, similar clashes to this. Another thing I wanted to ask you for examples of is this proposed new zone, the general industrial zone for this site. What are examples around our city of where this zone exists currently and proximity to residential areas?
So there's no industrial zones at all in the operative plan because they're called business zones instead. But areas where we've also, in the draft, applied the general industrial zone, Petone along, for example, Bouverie Street, Hutt Road, Waione Street, most of the industrial area in Nainai and Wingate, Hebden Crescent, I think it's Petone Crescent in Korokoro. Where else? The very northern end of Wainuiomata, that industrial area there, around much of Gracefield, where it sort of forms a buffer around the heavy industrial zone. If you have a look at the draft plan map, it's sort of the middle shade of purple between the light and heavy.
So some of those areas, not all of them, but some of them are in pretty close proximity to residential areas. Yeah.
Yeah, so this site is separated from residential area by double track railway line and access road for Kiwi Rail. That's probably pretty typical of the separation most of those have. Wingate, obviously the opposite side of the railway line from Holmes. Nainai, generally on the opposite side of local streets. Same with Waione Street. In Petone, they're often directly, that general industrial area is directly next to residential land. Other areas are a bit more separated. Gracefield on the opposite side of the Waifatu stream from residences, and Hebden Crescent and Korokoro on the opposite side of the motorway.
Thank you. The other question I had, and I don't know if this is too detailed, Chair, and it might need to come back to a future meeting, is this idea of somewhat deferring this particular decision, not the whole district plan, this particular decision, which I guess would involve either you stick with the status quo or go for the nearest thing to the status quo if that's required. What would be the process then for the landowner to pretty much request the same change that's proposed here? What would be the process that would have to be followed there? You mentioned that it quite possibly would just come through the same process. They would contest it not being changed.
Yes, so when the council proposes the plan change, step one that starts immediately is we notify it to everyone in the district and let them know we've proposed this plan change, make a submission on it. And so we'll receive how many submissions we receive. That's up to the community about how many they put in. But all you need to do is simply write in that official form saying what it is you want changed about the plan, and optionally, but preferably, why. And then we compile that all and see, well, what are all the areas in contention in the plan that people have submitted asking for. It costs nothing to make a submission and say, I would like this site to be zoned this rather than this, or I support this site being zoned this, or I want these provisions to be changed, or what have you. It's just a question of your time if you write it yourself, or paying someone to write it for you if you get someone to prepare it for you. So certainly the last time we did a citywide sort of zoning update, which was Plan Change 56, intensification, we received hundreds of submissions. Many of them are from people specifically asking that their specific site or another specific site near them be zoned something else. And then during the hearing, you go through for each of those and weigh up the evidence and the reasons given about why it should or shouldn't be one or the other thing. And that's part of the hearing panel's job.
So it possibly wouldn't require a separate process. It would likely get resolved through the same process, just from a different starting point in what we propose.
It's up to the council what starting point it proposes. It's up to the hearing panel what recommendation it makes to you. It's up to you whether you accept that. It's up to the Environment Court whether to overrule you. And then it's up to the council whether to revisit it all again with another plan change or variation further down the track.
And it's up to whatever submissions we receive.
I'm not the only one with the crystal ball questions. Councillor Briggs.
Been taken care of. Thank you.
Kia ora. Mayor Barry?
I suppose I'm just trying to get my head around, and hopefully this isn't too crystal ball gazing, but if we were to go out and a notified plan change with the status quo or as close to the status quo as possible, versus light industrial per se with site-specific rules around that, which of those two options with the, and again, I know we're blurring here, but which of those two options through a resource consent application, which would be required with both, for a waste transfer plant, which one would mitigate the concerns of residents the most? Do we have an idea? Because I suppose one is proposing site-specific rules and the other one currently doesn't have those site-specific rules. So I'm just trying to get my head around that.
I think that's possibly too much crystal ball gazing. You're right, Mr. Mayor.
I mean, one other comment, sorry, in relation to the resource consent is, we can't control the path of it to a certain extent. I mean, it could be withdrawn and a developer may choose to submit at a later stage. So again, my concerns about putting too much emphasis on the resource consent is you're effectively taking it out of the hands of council and leaving it to the owner of the site to almost, in some respects, dictate what happens when. Yeah.
I'm glad you asked it. I had the same question. Any further questions? Councillor Shaw.
I hope I'm not repeating some of the questions that have risen before, but just in regards to page 16, and I'm looking at your preferred option 1, general industrial zone, and there's already been a lot of comment about traffic, transport safety and congestion impacts, which I think are a real challenge, given the numbers that will be travelling through that interchange and around. Is that what's been applied for in the current resource consent with Waka Kotahi, or is it something that's addressed later? Because what worries me here is in this table that you've provided, the plan will be designed to manage these things, but management may not completely avoid all issues. So I'm just a little bit worried that those traffic concerns might not be addressed.
So the transport chapter that's in the draft, I haven't checked in with Peter to see how this has evolved since then. I think it does talk about managing those impacts rather than avoiding impacts. But the general scheme of it is that you do trigger that resource consent based on the expected volume of traffic. And once you trigger that resource consent, you're looking at all of the options to manage that effect, whether it's managing the times and flows of traffic in and out of the site, whether it's making upgrades to the transport network to improve that capacity or the safety, travel demand management about people's commutes. There's a whole range of things that can be that are considered in that consent to manage the transport impacts. For the purpose of making the decision on the district plan, those issues are always quite specific to a site, to a activity, and change over time. So it's quite a general framework for letting those decisions be made in the resource consent rather than the plan making stage. If you zone the site industrial, or for that matter, whatever you zone this site, there's a large number of things that could be applied for, that could happen on the site for however long the plan is live for. Each of those is going to have different characteristics and need to be assessed based on the flows of traffic, the times of day, the types of vehicles that come in. So that high trip generator threshold would be lower under that proposed option than for most sites in the city, to reflect, I think, the current state, which is that intersection isn't really designed for much traffic at all, and so almost any level of increase is going to need some thought and planning about how that works. But regardless, it's still left to the resource consent stage to decide exactly how that's managed, whether it's done through intersection upgrades or travel demand management or some other method. I hope that answers your question.
Kia ora, thank you. That was a really thorough explanation to a question I kind of had in my head. Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, sorry, just one question looking at the options now and the site-specific precinct provisions seem like a great idea, particularly with those more intensive options. There are three options it's attached to, the industrial, general industrial, light industrial, commercial mixed zone. And the fourth option is general rural or rural lifestyle zone, but it doesn't mention site-specific precinct provisions. I was just wondering if those similar provisions can be included in an option moving forward if it was closer to the status quo. Can you have these enabling provisions here, which presumably would be taken into account if there was a similar application to the one before us now?
I think the general zone provisions for the general rural zone probably address those as is without needing site-specific modification. It's quite a different zone in terms of the character it looks at and the effects it looks at.
Question from me. If we were to choose options 1, 2 or 3 with those site-specific provisions, they would then be, I presume, drafted over the next few months, and in that December meeting we would have the physical site-specific provisions in front of us with maps and all those details that at that stage we could make any decision at that stage. If we weren't happy with the site-specific provisions, we could change the zone, we could add, remove site, like that's when we're making the actual decision on Manor Park, is that correct?
Yep, you can, all of the decisions we're bringing you over the meetings this year, this committee can revisit or the council can revisit in December. Our hope is that we'll have got it pretty much into shape and we won't need to do much of that, but I think it's inevitable, there's always something.
And have most of those site-specific provisions come from the feedback that we received from the community when we did the non-statutory consultation?
I don't think anyone other than Waste Management actually suggested any provisions, and we're not adopting any of theirs. But we're planning on writing our own provisions to address the issues that residents and other people who gave feedback raised.
Yeah, but things around screening and stormwater management, they are being suggested as a result of the submissions we have received?
Yes, yeah.
And they wouldn't make it into the plan if we were to leave it status quo now? Those provisions wouldn't be there?
So things like, for example, the protection of the Dry Creek stream corridor is that this is unique for an industrial site about having a stream running right through the middle of it as opposed to along the edge. And so the sort of rules we've got about setbacks from waterways need sort of tweaking to cover that situation. That's the sort of thing we're talking about as an example, or I could talk about the others if you prefer.
Cool, thank you. Are there any other questions from members? Mayor Barry.
All right, final one from me. Just for clarification, I think I know the answer to this question, but with the 4 options you have put forward, obviously you've got recommended options and the likes, but there was some very good comment around option 3 around the commercial mixed-use zone, but with some very strong comments which I would fundamentally agree with in regards to that not fitting with overall plans for the city and region. But what you're saying is that is a legitimate option in regards to, appealability or other issues of making a decision based on facts and evidence. So that is a genuine option for us, or is that one that has a higher risk of going down the path of being appealed and overturned and changed? Or
they've all got a risk of being appealed. they've all got a risk of being overturned. I think that option 3, because of the outcome I think you're likely to see in practice, would be large format retail. It's a question of how much you think that fits with the vision for the city that we've got in the spatial plan, that we've got in the other strategic work council's done throughout the district plan review to date. In and of itself, I think it's a decision you can make. It's a question for this committee and for the council about whether you think it's consistent with those other approaches or whether you'd like to change those other approaches.
Final one for me before we move on to the recommendations. Hopefully it's not too crystal ball-y, but the plan change process doesn't make it any easier depending on which zone we go with for the resource consent. Does the resource consent cover basically this whole site that we're talking about? In which case, if the resource consent goes through under the operative plan, is almost irrelevant what the new zone is if it's already been fully covered by the resource consent?
If the resource consent were to be approved for the waste transfer station, there'd still be 2 other lots not consented for anything specific. And under the current plan, they would still need a consent for almost anything that would happen on those that's likely to, unless it's somehow another rural activity. I think in terms of the transport effects, Tim might be able to.
Yeah, that's 100% right. So all the first resource consent is purely about the waste transfer station. The rest of the site, there is no proposals for that. The second application is purely about the intersection improvements. And as I said, that is dealing with traffic movements across the whole site, but it is not involved in allowing any other use on the site. So the only actual use that is proposed is the waste transfer station, or being consent is sought for.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for clarifying that, Councillor Mitchell.
Sorry, just to slide in one last one. Those 2 other sites, under the current operative plan, what kinds of activities could be permissible in there? And I'm thinking along the lines of not waste transfer stations, but if that's one example, what are some other examples of what these residents could reasonably expect to pop up there, even without us rezoning it?
So I gave some examples of some of the activities on page 20 there in the table. I mean, it's a rural zone, so straight out of the gate, you'd be looking at horticulture, agriculture, agricultural related industries, recreation activities of various kinds, storage. Yeah, I think there's also a wide range of things that consent could be applied for as well. That would also could be considered. But yeah, in a sense, anything you'd expect to find out in the actual countryside is something that the zone rules would apply to.
But all those activities in the table marked as non-complying, yep. Could they still come in even though they're non-complying?
If it's non-complying, you can still apply for it. The test for that is you can meet one of 2 effects. Either it has no significant adverse effects, from memory is the wording, or it is consistent with the objectives and policies of the plan. So the general idea with non-complying is that in general, this sort of thing is not encouraged for the zone, but there may be specific circumstances for the particular thing you're proposing that make it okay.
Sorry. Did the developer actually answer this question at your meeting?
Sorry, we're not able to.
Okay.
Sorry.
Industrial park.
Is there Councillor Parkins? I think Councillor Edwards.
Kia ora. So under consented or non-consenting, activities that wouldn't require consent, would a green waste or composting option fit into that category, or would that need consent?
I don't know that off the top of my head, unfortunately, and my computer has crashed. I don't know if Nathan's got his and can double check the draft rural zone rules and get back to you in a minute or so while we take another question.
Councillor Edwards.
A couple of times it was asked in public comment, or the point was made, the site is being raised 6 metres. Has that been taken into account in our opinion on the flood risk there?
Yes, I think that significantly reduces the risk and increases the number of things that can practically happen on the site without that risk. We haven't incorporated it into the hazard mapping for the plan because I think doing a crunchy detailed remapping of it kind of needs to wait until the work is actually physically complete and then resurveyed through the aerial survey that checks ground level, which feeds into the modelling that Wellington Water does. So we don't think that's likely to happen or be done in time for this plan, but we'll still trigger a resource consent for that flood risk, but I think that'll be easy to show that, well, we've addressed that through raising the ground level.
Cool. Nathan, were you able to find the answer to Councillor Parkin's question?
Just looking up now, the general rural chapter from the draft district plan didn't specifically mention that activity, and as a result it gets caught up by a catch-all rule. So anything that's not specifically addressed by any other rule is a non-complying activity, so that sort of activity would be a non-complying activity.
Cool, no final questions? Great, we'll move on to the recommendations, which are on page 7. I will read them. I'm just contemplating. Mayor Barry?
I was just going to say, we've just basically been going for 2 hours, whether we have a break and then get into it. Yep.
Yeah, that's probably wise. We do need to take a break at the 2-hour mark anyway, so this would end up being right in the middle of debate. So we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back. Kia ora, thank you. Members of the public, if you are wishing to watch, it is being live streamed on our YouTube channel. You can rewind and watch the bit you missed while you're travelling, but you're obviously more than welcome to stay and join us.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just with regard to item 5, 30 Benmore Crest, the voting on the recommendation, I will not be voting on that recommendation. Noting that as a mana whenua representative, I have to have regard to the aspirations of Ngāti Toa to develop their land and gain a commercial return, but as a member of Taranaki Whānui, I haven't received any instruction from them around the validity or otherwise of changing the zoning to an industrial one right next to Te Awa Kairangi. So I find myself conflicted on that matter.
Kia ora, I think you're conflicted 3 ways. Thank you. Any other members have any conflicts? No. I'll move those. Can I have a seconder? Count Deputy Mayor Lewis. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? Declare that carried. Cool. We'll now move to item 5, the District Plan Zoning 30 Benmore Crescent. Does anyone have a motion they're wanting to move? Councillor Edwards.
Yes, Mr Chair. I'd like to move that we ask our officers to prepare chapters relating to 30 Benmore Crescent Manor Park based on option 4.
Cool.
The status quo.
Thank you. I will second that. Any members wishing to speak? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, happy to support the motion, and I'd just like to acknowledge everyone that's come in from the Manor Park community today, presumably because they read my Hutt News op-ed in last October and are well informed on the issue. But, you know, throughout the course of our questioning, and I asked some questions about where this kind of zoning already exists, and one of the places that was mentioned is Nainai, which is my home. And I just imagined if similar circumstances were proposed in Nainai, it would be my community sitting here at the end of the table too. And so thank you for coming forward and sharing your concerns with us, and we really heard those. So I'm happy to support this motion. I think it's the best option for us, certainly to support the Manor Park community, just acknowledging that this will essentially go through the same process and the same challenges will be made either way, and the same evidence will be produced either way. So this is not the end of the road by any means, but just to acknowledge the community there, and you know, I'm sure the owner will come forth with their aspirations for the land too, but there'll be a lot more evidence in front of us for a decision that's in front of us today. So I think it's a sensible way forward for us to kind of step forward alongside the community there. But yeah, and of course, as has been said so many times today, this is independent of the waste transfer station, which is another issue altogether. So I don't think it'll affect the outcome of that much, but that's another challenge before the community there. So, but certainly happy to, I think for me, this feels like the right way forward.
Councillor Morgan.
Kia ora. I also do support this motion. I really want to say ngā mihi kia koutou to all of you for coming in and submitting. I think it takes a lot of courage, and what we heard today was community, and I'd like to hope that you take away from this meeting that we really do listen, and we're here elected to support our communities, and your words were really critical today in this piece. So I do really thank you. I think this motion gives us a really clear way forward of the status quo, but looking at that option 4. And I hope in what you discussed, and I think that was really enlightening. It sounds interesting. Sounds like a party going on, actually. But I was really, I value when you said working together, and I hope that may continue and get stronger and stronger. So thank you once again.
Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora. Permission to speak, Chair, because I'm not a regular member of this meeting. Thank you. Just want to acknowledge my fellow councillors for listening to the public submissions and really value that approach. I note this is not the end of the road for the community. It is going to be difficult with the resource consents and the process here, but I really appreciate the support that councillors have had. Thank you. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora, Deputy Mayor Lewis, then Mayor Barry.
I'd be supporting this amendment as well, this motion. The community today, I just want to congratulate you on being so organised and the way you presented your submission and got across all your points. So it was just well done, and you've taken good guidance. So congratulations.
Mayor Barry.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. I'm absolutely happy to support option 4 in this particular proposal. I just want to make a couple of comments in regards to something that is often perceived of councils, not just us, but right across the country, that decisions are predetermined, that we don't listen, you're wasting your time. And I would say nothing can be further from the truth. The process we have gone through is we went through a non-notified, non-statutory process to put out proposal to our community, and our officials weighing up all of the evidence, all of the information, the needs of our region and industrial land. Absolutely is a shortage, and we do need to be having these sort of challenging conversations as a region. Were put on the table for us, and I think that the officers have actually done a pretty stellar job in presenting all of the facts, all of the evidence for us, and included in the 4 options is the status quo. So there has certainly been no dismissal of the views of the community throughout this process. It's just that when our officials go away, they look at all the information and then make a recommendation to us. We are elected by our residents, and we are here to put that layer of community voice, community view as representatives across the decisions that are made. Alongside that, we also need to be thinking about the greater good for our city and for our region, and I think we have weighed that up here in this conversation, and I think that those matters will continue throughout the process from here. So for me, certainly option 4 is the best way forward at this particular point. I couldn't support at all option 3, for example, because I just don't think that works with all of our other focuses and strategies in the city. And option 1 or 2 would be more logical with this particular location. But I think, in my mind, option 4 is certainly what I would support. But just to reiterate what Councillor Mitchell said and others have said, there will need to be a process through the notified stages. The landowners will need to put up their case, put up their evidence, and exercise their rights to express what they would like to see happen as well as our community in Manor Park and wider. So very happy to support this particular recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor Barry. I'll speak briefly. I think this really just demonstrates the beauty of doing our preemptive non-statutory consultation that we did. I know some of the submitters sort of said we hadn't done a good enough job, but this is proof that we have. It's the process for hearing the aspirations in a non-RMA forum to be able to make tweaks to our plan before notifying the plan later this year. As is stated in the report, and our officers confirmed again today, that this decision has no impact on the current resource consent that's currently on hold. And as far as the operative plan goes, the landowner or any member of the public will be able to make a submission through the notified plan for or against what we are putting out there. So the place for weighing up the evidence, the expert planners, is through the district plan review panel of external commissioners who will weigh up all of those things. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this isn't the end of it. And as far as the resource consent for the waste transfer station, this, in my mind, has no impact at all on that, and it certainly doesn't. So, Councillor Edwards, were you wishing to speak?
Well, just by moving option 4, I think we're removing that perception that our decision today has an impact on that resource consent thing, and I think that's a positive. I reject any accusation that council has been predetermined on this, but a decision we're just about to make sort of removes that entirely, I hope. And as others have said far more eloquently than I can say, this is just the beginning of things. And I also congratulate Manor Park people on standing up for what they believe in. There's a landowner there that also will stand up for what he wants to achieve for the city, and going through the processes ahead of us, we'll have experts that can weigh that up, and ultimately it'll come back to council for a full decision.
Cool. We'll just bring the recommendations up onto the screen. I did have a question of officers just while that's coming up, whether there's any merit in still keeping to be in there with the site-specific provisions, or are they completely just not needed if we are going down this route?
I think it's up to you. I don't think there's any harm in leaving it in, but there's, I think that the issues for this site, if it remains rural, are largely the same as for other rural areas. So, yeah, you could specifically direct us to consider those issues when we draft it, or you could leave it out.
Cool. Maybe could we keep it there, but just change it to consider any site-specific provisions for 30 BM more. So just put. Obviously, we've got between now and December to finalise this.
Sorry, it's just one clarification point. Obviously, what we've heard is it's the decision is to go with the status quo, which we obviously understand and accept. Number A there talks about general rural zone or rural lifestyle zone, so it would be useful to have that direction now that if we are going for status quo, it would be the general rural zone, just to clarify for us that that decision is made. Yeah.
I think that's definitely the intention of the mover, to keep it as general rural zone. So we'll remove all those specific provisions there, noting that a lot of them are picked up with the zone, as the officer just said. But obviously between now and December, we'll be drafting the plans, and if there are any instances where you think actually having some site-specific provisions would be useful, there's no point drafting them if they're identical to the underlying zone. But this still will give us the flexibility if there is something that pops up through the drafting that we could add in some site-specific provisions if it alleviated issues further. So with your approval, are you happy with those amendments, Councillor Edwards? Cool. I'd like to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? I declare that carried. Cool. We'll now move on to the next item. Which is item number 6, the spatial plan. Thank you for your patience. You can take the paper as read, but is there anything you'd like to highlight from your report? Thank you.
So today we're just seeking your approval of the general direction that's summarised in the 8 strategic moves that are contained in the cover report and in the document itself. And we also seek your approval to combine the engagement, the community engagement, with the district plan, and to change the name of the document to ensure that there's no confusion at the community engagement stage. I'm happy to take questions.
Kia ora. Thank you for the report. Is there any questions from any members? No? Cool. I was going to make the note that it's a very well laid out report and accompanying paper as well. It's obviously a very complicated topic, but laid out in a way that is very readable, which I think not only us as members reading it, but also members of the public reading it and engaging with it through the consultation process. And obviously fully support aligning our consultation period with the district plan with the slight revised time frame then. So I'm happy to move this one. I'll move items 1 through 6 on page 28. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Morgan. Anyone wishing to speak? Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Mitchell.
I probably should have asked it in question time, but you're moving quite fast, Mr. Chair. I noticed that the Waterloo Station transport-oriented development is mentioned in the chapter or strategic move to do with transport, but it isn't mentioned in the strategic move number 2, build up Central and Northern Valley floor, and yet that TOD has quite a bit of potential for both commerce and residential on that site.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Is it worth mentioning it in both, do you think?
We could add some words to this effect, yes.
We'll go back to questions. Pretend I never moved it. I'll just take a breath. Councillor Mitchell and then Deputy Mayor Lewis. Cool. We'll reserve the comments for when I move the motion. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Just in regard to the strategic moves and under, where am I? D, the instruction there to recognise the risks of climate change and build community preparedness, is that saying that this plan is doing that, or you're the department or the policy driving it, or is it still with the climate change and district plan?
I think all the spatial plan does is signal that we need to start doing some work. So the thinking in what that may look like is yet to come. I think we're just signalling there is a strategic decision to start looking into that particular challenge.
Any other questions? Cool. I'll move the motion that I've already moved, seconded by Councillor Morgan, and moved comments from Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo your earlier comment about how well laid out the actual plan is and easy to read. I really liked the issue by issue, the current state and the challenges and opportunities. I think that'll make it really easy for our community to digest as well. And just on that note, fully support the renaming of the plan as well. We've heard even in public comment today that people can see how the district plan and this spatial plan currently are linked, but we wouldn't want them to get confused about which one does what. So I think it makes it a lot more clear with a different title that what this one's about and how it sits apart from the district plan. So thank you for your work.
And on that note, like I said, I fully support this being consulted on with the district plan. And it's not up for us to decide yet, but obviously our comms team as to how the engagement works, where one will be quite a statutory process, the spatial plan will be not. How feedback can link between the two. I imagine it's quite hard if someone makes a submission on the spatial plan for that to be counted as a RMA process, but we might be able to do things around the other way. If they make a district plan submission, the spatial plan might still be able to read those submissions and take on some of the feedback. But yeah, that's not a decision for us today, but obviously a challenge that I can see with doing these two together. Any other further comments? No, I'll move the motion then. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? Declare that carried. We'll now move on to page 1110 of the agenda, which is an update on the three waters and natural hazards and coastal hazards chapters for the proposed district plan. I'd like to ask Tim Johnson, Head of Planning, to speak to the item.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the paper as read and take any questions. And obviously we have James Beeben with us, who I think most people know. James Beeben, he's probably at this table more than me, myself, actually, to be honest. But
not that bad.
Obviously, yeah, James is helping us. He's our technical expert on natural hazards and three waters. So, yeah, here to assist us.
Cool. He pātai tōna mima. Any questions? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I've got a few. The first couple are about three waters and just a couple of the changes that have been made. One is removal of requirements for a grey water tank on new residential units. And it goes on to explain these are a mitigation measure that can be used in response to the requirements in proposed Plan Change 1. Just kind of curious about the change from a requirement to something that can be used. Is that lessening our impact on stormwater demand by?
Yep. So this was kind of one that was put in a little bit as a gold option when we first went out for the draft. So we kind of wanted to go out very broad with the draft, kind of put all options out there rather than surprise the development community because of this. What happened is when the Hutt City plan was out for draft, Greater Wellington Regional Council released proposed Plan Change 1, which was a fundamental change to how stormwater needs to be managed within the catchments of Upper Hutt, Lower Hutt, Wellington City and Pororoa. And that kind of trumped a lot of what some of the provisions we'd gone out with, and it was a very large strength. And to give an example, is anything over 30 square metres of impervious surface requires a stormwater management device now, and that management quantity, and then that's to manage the kind of the first flush effects, and then anything over 1,000 square metres, you're starting to get into management of quality. So it's quite a big step to see change from where we were, where the previous control was. If you did more than 3,000 square metres of earthworks, then you were into that consideration. So it's brought the threshold down and it's capturing a lot more development. What we didn't want to get to was the duplication of provisions between plans. So what we have seen the development community do and the uptake in response to GWRC is start putting in grey water retention use and tanks in places. But there's other options they can do, and there's all going. So while the development community is responding, particularly in relation to an apartment style development, it's not the only response they're doing out there. The second limb of the test was that Wellington Water didn't have an evidence base there to support that the grey water tanks in a lower Hutt context would make a meaningful contribution to the reduction of water demand and the stormwater management justifiably for their costs. So the cost benefit aspect of it was missing from a Wellington Water side. So it was a kind of a dual purpose reasoning to why that got removed out of the, it's been suggested to be removed out of the provisions.
Thank you. I'm a little bit surprised that Wellington Water wouldn't have some evidence or at least an opinion on that, given that we know that water use goes up drastically over summer, and everyone points to people overwatering their gardens and filling their swimming pools. It's all that external use that the grey water tanks were intended to supplement or replace. So I'm a bit surprised that that's their thing, but anyway. The other one on that list was the water meters, and this actually came up in an earlier meeting, and we talked about how well, I think at that meeting we were talking about two different things, not the same water meters that we're talking about introducing for monitoring our water supply. And I wonder, is this now the same thing that we're talking about? Because we've put money into our long-term plan with an intention to go through with that, but the final decision making hasn't been made. And if we're going out and saying water meters are required for all new residential units, are they specifically going to be the right water meters that we're going to need in future when we roll them out across the network?
So this has been an issue that's been grappled a bit with the Porora City. They've got this requirement sitting in their plan that all new residential units have water meters in. And I was involved in that Three Waters chapter and that same question out. Apparently they're like $50 to put in when you're doing a new development. Like they're really quite cheap at that new development stage. And what's used now is a form of digital one where they can actually, it unscrews all the infrastructure's in for the water meter, but the actual measuring device just gets unscrewed, and then that can just be put on when it's needed. So, and I understand it's quite adaptive to whatever council system is going to be used, is my understanding at present. Whether there's a specific type of meter that wants to be specified, that can be something we can have conversations with Wellington Water on.
Again, this won't be a rule that has immediate legal effect when the plan is notified. So again, this will be a couple of years away before it actually has to be implemented. So plenty of time to address that.
Thank you. Yeah, it just felt like we might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. My other question is on a different topic altogether, which is about the carve-outs. Thank you, folks. On the high coastal hazard overlays, and Seaview Marina, of course, can't be located away from being in that high hazard overlay. And this is all about sea level rise, really. But the proposal to include Seaview Industrial Zone, because there's a shortage of industrial land in the region. However, this is a place where there's a wastewater treatment plant and storage of hazardous chemicals and all those. And the other one, Petone Metropolitan Zone, because there's a significant commercial area. Like, I understand we need industry and commerce, but the way it was explained is that there was a requirement for them to reduce risk, but that's now being carved out. So I just kind of still question why, if there's future development in the Seaview Industrial Zone or the Petone Metropolitan Zone, why we wouldn't want them to reduce risk knowing what's coming.
Cool. So what I mean by carve out, so the NZCPS, New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, says when you've got significant infrastructure or significant investment, you can have a little bit of a look and not just take a complete avoid risk approach. So when I say carve out in this instance, these are areas that are in high or medium coastal hazard areas. And if you were to do development, it would either be a discretionary or non-compliant activity. To cut the carve out, so to speak, is to drop that to restricted discretionary activity. So they are still in a consenting pathway, and they have, instead of trying to avoid an increase in risk, which is what the high hazard threshold is, they're seeking to minimise the risk. So when we use the term carve out, we're setting, they're still got to address the hazard, they're still got to go through a consenting framework, but the level of threshold they need to achieve is to minimise, which means to reduce as far as practicable as to avoid, as opposed to avoid, which is a higher test to get to. So the carve-out is not in the sense to make it permitted. It is to still allow for development and redevelopment to go in there. The reality is, if we zoned out industrial development in Seaview, it's a regionally significant industrial hub, there would be very significant implications, wider implications. So we need to kind of still allow for some development to occur in there, some regeneration to occur, same with the Tony Commercial. But what it is they still got to take the hazard bait. There's still a framework they've got to look to reduce risk from hazard, and they can't just cap blanche ignore it.
Kia ora. Any other questions? Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora. Just heading back to the grey water systems. When you were mentioning grey water in your discussion, you were talking about it leading into the stormwater. My understanding of grey water is that it is into the wastewater system. So it's quite a different thing to what you've just talked about. I can't see why it wouldn't have an effect. And so I'm wondering, what analysis have we actually carried out? What is this lack of evidence based on? Is it just that we didn't ask, nobody answered the question? If so, can we actually go back and ask the question properly?
Yep. So I have had several conversations with Wellington Water around evidence-based. So my understanding of the grey water systems is they take, quite a few of them take the stormwater off the roof, and then they bring them into in for grey water reuse in the system. So that's what some of them are. So it is a stormwater, essentially taking your stormwater and putting it into your wastewater network, allowing it for to be reused and all that through there. Wellington Water have evidence for grey water tanks, and some guidance on it. What they don't have is what is the impact and is the net benefit in a lower Hutt context of such a degree that it warrants a district plan intervention or a requirement on new housing, given they represent a $10,000 cost to new residential development. That evidence wasn't intended to be, when I spoke to Wellington Water, they hadn't had a necessary intent to go out and do that research due to other competing priorities.
So follow up on that one. So you're talking about that leading into the stormwater, but also it actually reduces the impact on the freshwater. So I'm presuming that analysis hasn't been done either.
Sorry, I'm a little bit lost there, so sorry.
So when you're using a grey water system, the priority for that grey water is to reduce the amount of treated clean water that you are using. It's redirecting stormwater, or preferably water that has already been treated, potable water that goes through a shower or a bath, and then is used for flushing toilets, etc., in non-potable situations. So it's actually reducing our demand on our fresh water.
Yes, that's correct. So that's where they've been used in Kapiti for the reduced demand on fresh water. So they have that kind of dual use in there, where they've been kind of adapted in the post-Plan Change 1 context is kind of in a stormwater management treatment position, because it's basically been seen as an acceptable solution to deal with the contaminants running off your roof, for example, into your stormwater network that then discharges eventually into your rivers and streams. So this puts it through a reuse system. So, and the evidence base for Greater Wellington is, when you look at Greater Wellington's plan change evidence base, which we've gone back and looked at, they don't identify what are actual mitigation measures, and they're meant to be bringing out a guidance document since October, which still hasn't dropped. And so it's kind of been through the trial and error of consenting that has determined what is the acceptable solutions in a Plan Change 1 context. So there's not a pure evidence base that sits out there either for Greater Wellington or Wellington Water at the moment that we could potentially pick up and adopt and bring through into this plan.
Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Just following on from that line of questioning, it was Wellington Water you spoke with, but I was surprised that they perhaps didn't. I thought the Whaitua would have had a whole lot of detail on that through the GW.
Yeah. So the Plan Change 1 that's come out from Greater Wellington is them giving effect to the Whaitua process. So that's what Plan Change 1 is. That's why it's only covering certain catchments at the moment. The Kapiti and Wairarapa Whaituas, I believe the Kapiti one's just concluded, and they're going to be bringing in a plan change for that. But this is what this actual plan change is giving effect to the Whaitua. Yeah.
Yes, my understanding was there had been data done on all of that sort of the grey water and rainwater stuff.
I'll go back to Wellington Water and ask. Certainly my current explorations with them hasn't turned up anything, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I'll go back and ask again. Yeah, it's all good.
So GW's PC1's been notified?
It is notified, and unlike a district council, its rules have immediate legal effect from notification. So the day the rules notified, the rules were in play.
And does it go through a consultation?
It's been through a consultation. It's had a huge number of submissions, a lot of submissions in opposition to it. The hearing schedule hasn't been set yet. We understand that it's been set for the end of this year, but we're still waiting for a timetable to come out.
And presumably there's some stuff in there that requires councils to do work within their district plan. Are those timeframes going to align with December?
So the plan change one was to the natural resources plan, not to the regional policy statement. So there's no it's the council kind of rule book, regional council rule book. So there's no directives to district plan upgrades within a natural resources plan. Yep.
Cool. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Another question just around clarification of the term carve out. Is it the same as an overlay, like we have, you've got a zone and then you put rules over top?
Yep. So at the moment, it's just named zones within an area, but I have thought about the idea of just denoting the area. Wellington City, for example, has got a carve out and it's for the central commercial zone. So it's got a similar situation where its CBD is in not a great place from a coastal hazards perspective. You can't just say to the Wellington CBD, you need to up and relocate. So it sits in there and says, well, yes, you can still do development, you're a restricted discretionary activity, you need to minimise the risk, but you don't need to avoid the risk, which you might have been if you're in Lyell Bay, for example. So it's designed to be very discrete areas, it's not Petone residential, for example, and all that. So it's very named areas.
Any other questions? Cool. I'm still a bit torn on the water tank situation. It definitely reads, on the one hand, that PC1's kind of gazumped our awesome climate change initiative we had in there as well. But I don't understand Wellington Water's position of it not making any difference to our situation here in the Hutt. If we're collecting water off roofs to put through irrigation, that has an impact on our water usage, particularly over summer. If we're using grey water to flush toilets, that reduces the demand. So there has to be some impact. But it sounds like maybe they've gone through the cost-benefit analysis. So I just wonder if between now and maybe December or soon if it can, or if you've got an update now, maybe a bit more work could be done on this.
I was just suggesting possibly changing the recommendation slightly in relation to this particular issue and saying between now and December, exploring further evidence in relation to the use of grey water tanks. Not great wording, but we I hear what you're saying. We've got time to dig into this a bit more before we come back to full council. So yeah.
The joys of having a revised time schedule means we've got this up our sleeves. Cool. Is there any other following questions? No. Cool. I'd like to move then that we note the contents of the report and explore further evidence on grey water and rainwater tanks. They are different things? Water tanks? Yeah. Evidence on, just put water tanks. Could we maybe bring the recommendations up on the screen? Sorry. Cool. So there's recommendations. I'd like to move that we note the contents of the report, explore further evidence on water tanks, and direct officers to complete the 3 waters and natural and coastal hazards chapters for the proposed district plan. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mitchell. Anyone wishing to speak to this item? No. Cool. We'll leave it there. I'd like to move the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? Declare that carried. Thank you, Mr. Bevan and Tim Johnson. I'd like to move on to item 8, the information item, which is on page 117 of the agenda. Do any members have any questions on the timeframe forward work program? Obviously, this item includes the meeting cycles, but also includes the appendix with all the chapters still to be considered between now and December. And very usefully is broken down chapters that have already come to us and are basically ready to wrap up into the proposed district plan in December, and then those chapters that are still coming to us for an update. So it should be a really good place for people that have particular interest topics, whether it's notable trees or quarry zones or Seaview Marine Zone. You can see quite clearly in here when they are coming to us for an interim decision before a December semi-interim final decision, before then going out for consultation before a final decision is made, before it comes back to us for a final decision. Any questions? Clear as mud. Awesome. I'd like to move the motion then that we accept the forward work program. I have a seconder, Councillor Mitchell. Anyone wishing to speak? No, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? I declare that carried. Moving on to item 8, questions. I've received no questions, so I'll move on to item number 10, the closing formalities. Me karakia tātou. Unu hia e te uru tapanui, kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takatu. Koi rā e rongo, whakaeaki ki runga, kia wātea, ai rā kua wātea, hau pai mārie. Kia ora, thank you members and officers, and again thank you to the members of the public that joined us for today's